So next up, we have Randy Nelson presenting on perennial ornamental grasses survive repeated cycles of submergence in a simulated rain garden environment. And Randy, I see your slides are up, so it's good to go.
All right. Thank you, Brady. And as you just mentioned, I'll be presenting here on a study that we recently completed out in the greenhouse. To start with, a rain garden is simply a depression that is created in the landscape to capture some type of runoff from an impervious surface. If you look at this photo, for example, we have impervious surfaces, we have roofs, we have driveways, and for this particular rain garden, it's actually capturing water runoff from the adjacent roadway. Rain gardens are beneficial because they do keep stormwater in the landscape as opposed to letting it go directly into the stormwater drainage system. Once in the landscape, or excuse me, once in the rain garden, that water is then allowed to infiltrate into the soil, evaporate, or transpire through the plants. Well, at the same time, pollutants that are potentially in that water can be remediated. Rain gardens are typically planted with woody plants as well as herbaceous perennials. Generally speaking, in a rain garden, it should drain within 2 days, although at times soil pores can get clogged or rainstorms can be rather frequent, leading to plants that are submerged. One group of plants that are often recommended for rain gardens are ornamental grasses. The grasses that we selected for our study include tufted hairgrass, switchgrass, big blue stem, Chinese silvergrass, little blue stem, blue grama grass, and feather reed grass. We selected these 7 because they're commonly recommended for rain gardens. However, little research exists to back up that recommendation. These are all native to North Dakota, with the exception of Chinese silvergrass and feather reed grass. In addition, when these are recommended for rain gardens, it's only the species, and these grasses do have improved cultivars that are commonly available in the nursery trade, and they're just more popular with consumers because of the improved attributes, which could include foliage color as well as increased resistance to lodging. For each of these grasses, we did select one commercially available cultivar that's listed on the left-hand side here to use in our study. Looking at the wetland indicator categories, we represent 4 of the 5 categories. And of course, these categories are used by the United States Department of Ag to estimate the occurrence of a plant in a wetland or a non-wetland environment. Therefore, looking at their wetland indicator category, it does give us an idea as to how much soil moisture these plants can handle. For example, if you look at tufted hairgrass, it's a facultative wetland plant. And if you look at the bottom of the slide here, those particular plants usually occur in wetlands, but may occur in non-wetlands. Whereas if you compare it with blue grama grass, for example, it's an upland plant, and upland plants almost never occur in wetlands. Again, the wetland indicator categories can tell us a little bit about where they're going to, or how much soil moisture they can handle, but we don't know if they can handle submergence, which leads us to our research question, and that was to determine the effect of submergence depth and duration on growth and survival of our 7 grass species. And before I jump into the experiment, I want to give you a visual representation of the grasses that we used in our study. And I just want to point out 3 real common ones that that you probably have seen already. The first one, blue heaven, little blue stem, and then directly under that one, we have purpurescence Chinese silvergrass, and right next to that one, we have Carl Forrester, feather reed grass. Again, 3 common ones that you've probably seen somewhere out in the landscape. For our greenhouse study, we purchased all of our grasses as plugs from wholesale nurseries, and we planted them into 2.8-liter nursery containers that were filled with a mixture of barn soil, sand, and peat moss on a 4:5 to 1 ratio by volume. After they were planted, we allowed the grasses to establish for 3 months in the greenhouse. And our study was run from December of 2020 until March of 2021. During that time period, we repeated the study twice. In the greenhouse, we utilized a randomized complete block design with a factorial arrangement and 3 replicates. Our factorial arrangement consisted of our 7 species. We used 3 submergence durations and 2 submergence depths. And we also included a control that was not flooded. I want to spend a little bit of time on our submergence durations. We selected 2 days because, as I said earlier, a rain garden should drain within 2 days. And we selected 4 days to represent a rain garden that is receiving maybe a lot of rain. Maybe the storms are more frequent. And then we also selected 7 days to represent a rain garden that is no longer functioning properly. Perhaps the soil pores have clogged and now that water is just staying in that garden. For submergence depths, we selected 15 centimeters because that is the typical depth of a residential rain garden. And we also selected 30 centimeters as a depth to represent a commercial rain garden, perhaps one that is collecting water from a parking lot. Those are typically much larger in size as well as much deeper. For the study itself, if you look at the top photo, that is a representation of an established grass plant. We took that and then placed it into a 7-gallon container with no drainage holes, and then we filled it with tap water. And we filled it either to 15 centimeters or 30 centimeters above the soil line. And once the submergence duration was met, the grass plant was removed from that container, allowed to freely drain for 2 days, and then it would go back into its submergence treatment. We continued that cycle until the 7-day submergence duration treatments went through 4 cycles. For the data that I'll be presenting today, I'll be talking about shoot mass, root mass, and a visual damage rating. All of our data was expressed as a percent of the control and analyzed, with the exception of the visual damage rating. We use an analysis of variance, and we use the mixed procedure in SAS. Our runs were combined, and during the analysis, run and rep were considered random variables. When we did have significance, we used Tukey's for mean separation. Before I get into the shoot mass data, and I do want to mention for shoot mass, we had a main effect, which I'll be talking about in just a minute, followed by an interaction. But I want to go over the figure first. Along the y-axis, we have percent shoot mass expressed relative to the control. And if you look at 0, basically anything above 0 was greater than the control. Anything less than 0 would be less than the control. Underneath each bar, we have the grass species listed, followed by the wetland indicator category. For relative shoot mass, switchgrass had significantly greater relative shoot mass when compared with the other species, with the exception of little bluestem and feather reedgrass. As I mentioned earlier, we also had an interaction, and that was a submergence duration by submergence depth. And for this figure, we have the lighter blue is our 15 centimeter depth, darker blue is our 30 centimeter depth. Underneath that, we have our 2-day, 4-day, and then followed by 7-day. The interaction actually occurred for the 4-day, where the 15 centimeter depth had significantly greater relative shoot mass when compared with 30 centimeter depth. For root mass, we have 2 main effects that I'll be talking about. The first one is a species main effect. And in this case, little bluestem had significantly higher relative root mass when compared with the rest of the species, with the exception of big bluestem, while tufted hairgrass had significantly less relative root mass when compared with the other species, with the exception of feather reedgrass. We also had a duration main effect for root mass. And in this figure, the light blue, or excuse me, the green is our 2-day, the gold is 4-day, and the orangish brown is the 7-day. For the duration main effect, the 7-day submergence treatment had significantly less relative root mass when compared with our 2-day submergence treatment. Before I get into the visual damage rating data, I want to give you an idea of how it was conducted, as well as what the visual damage ratings look like. At the very end of the trial, they were given, each plant was given a visual damage rating on a 1 to 10 scale. You are currently looking at tufted hairgrass, Pixie Fountain, and these were given, or these were submerged to a depth of 30 centimeters. And the one on the left, of course, was not, that was our control. And then we have our 2-day submergence, 4-day submergence, and 7-day submergence. And underneath that, we have our visual damage rating. If you look at the control, that had a rating of 1, so it had up to 10% dieback. The 2-day had a rating of 8, and that would be up to 80% dieback on the plant. And then our 4-day and 7-day would be up to 100% dieback. So quite a difference going from the control to the 30 centimeter submergence for 2-day treatment. Looking at our visual damage rating data, we did have an interaction of species and submergence duration. And again, the green is our 2-day, the gold is 4-day, and that orangish brown is our 7-day. Before I get into the interaction, I just want to point out switchgrass and Chinese silvergrass, just how well those grasses did across the submergence treatments. For example, even if you look at their 7-day submergence, they had a significantly lower visual damage rating when compared with all the other 7-day submergence treatments. And I do want to contrast those two with tufted hairgrass and big blue stem. Even their 2-day had a really poor visual damage rating. Those two grasses suffered. And I should mention too that there are no significant differences within a species among those treatments for those 4 grasses that I just talked about. The interaction actually occurred for little blue stem, blue grama grass, and feather reed grass. For little blue stem and blue grama grass, the 7-day submergence treatment had significantly higher visual damage rating when compared with the 2-day rating. And when it came to feather reed grass, the 2-day and the 4-day had significantly lower visual damage rating when compared to the 7-day submergence treatment. I do want to show you a photo of switchgrass in just a moment. First, I'm going to talk about the interaction of duration by depth. And you saw this graph before. The interaction actually occurred for 4-day and 7-day, where the 15 centimeter depth had a significantly lower visual damage rating when compared with the 30 centimeter depth. And again, that occurred for both the 4-day and the 7-day, whereas the 2-day, there was no difference between the two. Now I will show you the photo of Northwind switchgrass. And again, this one was flooded to a depth of 30 centimeters, all these plants with the exception of the control. And again, underneath the treatment, we have the visual damage rating. I just want to point out how well the 2-day, the 4-day, and the 7-day looked, even though they were flooded to a depth of 30 centimeters. The 4-day had the highest, up to 20% dieback, but overall they did very well. In conclusion, I want to point out that switchgrass, Chinese silvergrass, and blue grama grass survived all of the submergence treatments, while the other grasses, some of the plants died for some of the treatments. All of the grasses that were submerged for 2 days had an acceptable visual damage rating, with the exception of tufted hairgrass and big blue stem, because even their 2-day visual damage rating was really poor. Based on the visual damage rating, switchgrass and Chinese silvergrass may be able to withstand longer durations of submergence. Therefore, they may be better suited to deeper parts of the rain garden, which is typically the center. And finally, the wetland indicator status was not predictive for survival or for the visual damage rating. And I want to conclude by thanking my committee, Dr. Aaron Daigh, Dr. Esther McGinnis, Dr. Christina Hargis, and Dr. Daigh Ling, and research specialist Nate Derby for his assistance in the lab and in the field. With that, thank you all for your time.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Randy. We have time for one question. All right, so one just came into the chat here, Randy. Why do you think tufted hairgrass performs so poorly compared to FAC upland plants, considering it is FAC?
Great question. What I think happened, tufted hairgrass, I didn't talk about plant heights, but tufted hairgrass was the shortest grass that we tried. And even at the 15 centimeter submergence, a good portion of that grass was completely covered. At 30 centimeters, that whole plant was completely submerged. And I think that's why it did so poorly, even at 2 days, where the other grasses had some foliage sticking above the water.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Randy.